Take it away, Finn.
It's time for Dodger baseball.
All right, guys, we're very excited today because we're joined by a national baseball writer for Fox Sports. You might know him because he covered the Dodgers for The Athletic, the Los Angeles Times, the OC Register, and ESPN. But the main reason we have him on today is because he's releasing a new book due out March 29th. And you can get it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and I'm sure other places. He'll let us know in a second. But I'm talking about Pedro Moura, who wrote a new book called How to Beat a Broken Game: The Rise of the Dodgers in a League on the Brink. Man, that's quite a mouthful. But anyways, guys, if you're a Dodgers fan or just a baseball fan in general, trust me, this is a must read. I had the honor of reading the entire book. It took me about 2 days because I couldn't put it down. It was just that good. So Pedro, thanks for coming on. This is just quite the pleasure. So I wanted to start with just, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for reading it. It's still, because it's not out yet, it's still in the stage where it's wild. I mean, I think it'll always be wild that people are reading it, but it's you're one of the first people I know that has read it, to completion. So that's great. I mean, it's great to hear. What inspired me to write the book? I grew up reading this, reading books like baseball books is how I learned the game, how I wanted to that was the entire goal of getting into this industry. You're talking about a kid who grew up in the suburbs and learned the game from watching Ben on TV and reading the Times and Daily News sports sections with breakfast. And how did it come together was really more that after the World Series, it became clear to me that, it was a possibility. And, a friend, Eric Nussbaum, who you guys might know, has read the wonderful book Stealing Home. He connected me with his agent, who connected me with the publisher, and pretty soon there was a deal to write this book. And so just kind of made that my life for the next 5 or 6 months. And now, several months after finishing it, it's about to be out in the world. Just it's a fun experience. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I know I didn't reference this, but where's the best place for Dodgers fans to go purchase this book?
Anywhere you like to. Smaller businesses better probably would be, that's a personal opinion. I believe you can find it anywhere, and if you just go to your local shop in Southern California or not, you can order it through them. These days, the local booksellers are pretty good at that. So, yeah, wherever suits your fancy.
Yeah, just the name dropping and all the quotes you were able to put together for this book was just incredible. It was like a flashback, just so many baseball names. And once you get a chance to read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's some chapters, Mookie Betts is featured in one, Clayton Kershaw, Andrew Friedman, among others. I'm not going to spoil it because I want people to be surprised. But I did have a question for you, Pedro, and I'll start off with, back in 2019, after the Dodgers had another heartbreaking postseason exit, they dominated during the regular season, but they just seemed to fall short against the Nationals. The offense was inconsistent. And, something to me just felt like they needed a leader in the clubhouse. And so one of the first episodes in this podcast, just out of nowhere with the Rendon, the Cole, Strasburg free agencies, I said, you know what? The Dodgers should just trade for Mookie Betts, which I didn't think was a possibility at that time until the rumors started to really turn up. And then I was all in, like, the Dodgers need to trade for this guy because I felt like he was the missing piece to put them over the top. So you do a great job of just pointing out like the importance that Mookie Betts brought to this team. So I just kind of want to get your perspective on, how important he's been to the Dodgers.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably plain to you three and probably plain to anyone watching this, how important he's been. But I guess from my perspective, I would note that I think the Dodgers would have been interested in acquiring him, even if he were not an elite leader as well, strictly for his baseball playing abilities. Like if you eliminated, if he talked to no one in the room and just went about his business, I think they would still be interested in that sort of player. It was just a surplus value sort of thing in a bonus. But I'm really interested in him, in that element of him, and I think I tried to get into it in the book, and I think there's a lot more to it probably still, that, you know, in terms of how he sets that example for players, and how the way he evaluates his own performance, and the way he is not happy with much in his own game kind of leads other people to self-challenge more, I think, when they're around him and when they witness how he behaves. And it also seems like he has a good way, unusually in modern baseball, I think, of almost like exacting a work-life balance for himself that, like, you know, I think we can all relate to, is hard to do. And he's pretty intense about work when he's at work, and pretty not intense about work when he's not there. And so I think all those things kind of lead to a guy who has the makings of a leader, and that's what the Dodgers have gotten. That said, I think the main reason they acquired him is because he's, you know, at his best, he's an 8 or 10 win baseball player, and
absolutely,
he was that in 2020. Yeah.
All right, I got one more for you right now, and then I'll let the other guys jump in. So this was a cool, you know, just like so much knowledge here. Like when you think of Andrew Friedman back with the Rays, and, you know, more for us, maybe not the younger generations so much, because the Rays have really stepped up their game, but the Rays were just a bad team for so many years. And then in 2008, you know, out of nowhere, they're in the World Series. And I don't think anyone saw that coming entering the season. But, you know, you point out how Andrew Friedman implemented the shifts, which was just so edgy at the time. And you point out how so many people in the industry don't like the shift, and it's kind of like boring the game to an extent. And then Andrew Friedman comes to the Dodgers, and now the Dodgers lead the league every year in the shifts implemented. And you even point out, like, Clayton Kershaw, at first he wasn't a fan of the shift, but he grew to like it more. So with that being said, I kind of want to get your thoughts on the possibility of the MLB banning the shift, and how does a guy like Andrew Friedman potentially adjust to that?
Yeah, I think he would adjust to it, you know, pretty easily, in that, like, you know, the way he and executives view their jobs are to exploit loopholes within the game, right? And so if you take those loopholes away, then they'll find new ones. And I don't, you know, as he says in the book, and I found this pretty humorous when he said it, you know, he doesn't enjoy doing the shift, like executing the shift either. He finds it, I believe it's a poor quality of life play, he said. Which, you know, I chuckled at when he said that, and it's like, I mean, yeah. So it is for everyone, and, you know, I blame writers like myself too for sort of welcoming in the advent of the shift with like wide eyes and just excitedly when it started to see it in 2014, 2015, when really every team was employing it, and when the FanGraph shift data started becoming available, and just like not understanding that that the excessive employment of it would create fewer balls in play and would create a worse product. And I get why we didn't see that at the time. And you know, some people I respect in the game still disagree with me on that, and disagree with the take that banning the shift would serve any real purpose. But I think for the Dodgers, it would represent, you know, a loss of some competitive advantage, right? You know, probably not a massive one, but they obviously think that shifting, even now that everyone knows the benefits of it in the current constraints, they obviously think it still provides them a competitive advantage, as evidenced by the fact they do it more than anyone else. So I suppose they would have to adjust, right? And it looks like they will in 2023.
True dat. All right, you guys go ahead.
Pedro, so speaking of Andrew Friedman, we've talked a lot about on this podcast about how he when he makes trades with other teams, you know, the not marquee guys like the Chris Taylors and the Max Muncies of the world, he'll kind of find these guys off the scrap heap, so to speak. And we often joke about how, you know, teams must be, you know, afraid to deal with Andrew Friedman, or may even question their own personnel within their organization as to what does Andrew Friedman see in this guy that we haven't seen for the past 5 years or whatever. You touched on that in your book. I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate on maybe the reluctancy of some teams to do deals with Andrew Friedman.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a significant thing, right? You can understand it from any perspective of, like, I've heard of this in fantasy football leagues, that if there's a guy in the league that is constantly getting the the star before the breakout, right? That, you know, if you're in a league for 4 or 5 years with this dude, and, you know, he can, you know, every year he manages to usurp the running back just as he's about to break out, you know, people are going to start rejecting his trades before they even analyze them. And I think you wonder about that. But these are, he's making trades with other really well-paid, well-respected and executives who hold themselves also in high self-regard. And so I think it's interesting. I think, I look at like the trade he made with the Cincinnati Reds, where it's not like he was stealing some sort of unknown or failed player, like in the case of maybe Chris Taylor from the Mariners, but able to essentially turn dollars into 2 top prospects for really no reason at all from the Reds' perspective. I'll never understand why a team would do that in their position. Cincinnati's also in the midst of another befuddling offseason right now. So I think there's always going to be, I shouldn't say always, but I would guess that there's always going to be a few teams, a few fish more or less, who, the behemoths can find and take over. I feel like if there's one of the biggest missing pieces in the book, and I guess this isn't a great advertisement for it, but I think this is sort of almost unanswerable, is like how you convince someone to do something that is so obviously not in their best interest. And how you can repeatedly do that. That's a wild thing, but for obvious reasons, that people doing that have no interest in discussing that, revealing how it happens, because that's almost like the secret sauce to their mix. So, I try to point out the levels of insanity within a trade like that. I'm talking about where they get Jeter Downs and Josiah Gray, who essentially get them half of Trey Turner and Mookie Betts each, essentially for a nothing trade any other way. Like they didn't lose or gain anything really other than those 2 prospects. And it's wild to me that even people who are at the top of their profession are convincing themselves that making a trade like that with the Dodgers is the answer. So to answer your question, Jake, I guess like why do teams do it? I don't know. I mean, they don't do it that much. I think we should say, like, this isn't something that happens every year. The Dodgers have lost some trades. They've given up a lot of talent in prospect trades. They gave up O'Neal Cruz to the Pittsburgh Pirates for Tony Watson. They gave up Yordan Alvarez to the Houston Astros for Josh Fields. They gave up, this was not necessarily a bad trade for them, but they gave up Grant Holmes and Frankie Montas to Oakland for Rich Hill and Josh Reddick. So they've lost some, but I think the degree to which the most lopsided trades that have been made have generally favored the Dodgers, and that's a big win for Andrew Friedman 7-8 years into his job.
Yeah, and I think that all Dodgers fans can respect that from him. And then, kind of in the similar vein, I mean, you look at the roster as the way it was constructed last year, and you look how they finished in the NLCS, and huge disappointment going, from the sort of taking down the division rival and the Giants, and then going on to the Atlanta Braves and not really performing how we expected them to perform. Now, granted, there were a ton of injuries and all that, but you talked about the 2021 season in your book, I know. I just kind of curious what your thoughts were on how it ended last year, in terms of, where the team's mindset was at. Obviously, you have so many injuries. Max Muncy, Clayton Kershaw, to name a few. The offense just was not there. And the only thing that really was there was the bullpen, and the starters were gassed. So what was your take as you watched the Atlanta Braves advance to the World Series?
Yeah, that's a good question. My take was that the Dodgers season, like, I guess my first take is that the Dodgers had a wonderful season in 2021. They won a bunch of games in the regular season, and that's for me the primary measure that I use to judge how a team performed that year. As you said, they were hurt in the postseason, a fair amount. So were other teams too, though notably not Atlanta, except for Ronald Acuna Jr. So it's like, I mean, the Giants were missing. I say this because the Giants were missing Belt in that first round too. I think the Dodgers were essentially, I try to make this case in the book. I think they played the postseason a little too desperately, and maybe you could argue that maybe they needed to in order to advance. At least they thought they needed to with their tricks that they played on the Giants, specifically in Game 5, to use what do you call it, an opener, and then Urias, and then pull him short, and then call in Scherzer which diminished Scherzer and diminished Urias later on. And it was like this big cascading effect. And you would think, I mean, Julio Urias had a wonderful season in 2021. And he was well equipped to start the game as normal. And there was, you know, the way he did pitch when he was called upon, there's no reason to think he wouldn't have been able to pitch, you know, to throw a standard 6-inning outing, which the Dodgers would have been able to handle with their bullpen, and would have led to, you know, Scherzer being theoretically ready to go fresh in game 1 of the NLCS. That was a desperate choice, I think. And it worked out for them in the short term, not in the long term. I think, you know, I would point to, and I do make the case in the book that I would point to that they were desperate even before the season began to repeat in signing Trevor Bauer, who, you know, who came with a lot of baggage at the time that they made the transaction. Obviously not the sort of baggage that emerged, but they knew that they were signing a player who had a history of antagonizing people and could cause problems. And so they determined that, you know, that player and the way he had pitched in 2020 was worth that risk. You know, I think they're not commenting on this at this time, but I think, you know, most people would tell you it hasn't been worth the risk thus far. And I think that, you know, that hindered them. They obviously recovered in a pretty amazing way by acquiring Trey Turner and Max Scherzer, 2 of the sport's 20 or 30 best players in one transaction at the deadline. But it's still, you know, they were still sort of behind, I think, in some way, and they didn't have the pitching depth down the stretch in September and into October that they were accustomed to. And I think the other element of last season, you know, despite their 106 win campaign, like, the other thing is that a lot of their prospects did not actually perform throughout the season when called upon. And I think that is something that I'm really interested in monitoring, like, because that was the first time in many years that the Dodgers essentially didn't call up a dude and have him immediately hit, you know, a home run, more or less. And so that really hampered their depth, right? And they were relying on the likes of like Steven Souza in the NLDS, and that's just not how the Dodgers have been built, right? They've been built on relying on Kike Hernandez off the bench in the playoffs, and there was a massive drop off between those two. And I expect the Dodgers to get back to where they were in terms of depth in 2022, but it's certainly something to monitor. Yeah,
definitely. And as we look towards this year, let's kick it over to David. What do you got?
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, Pedro. I'm really looking forward to reading your book. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about the current Dodgers team, because I would like to read the book in full and not have it be spoiled. For the opening day roster, I figure there's about 20-ish or so locks, but I'm curious what you think about the back end of the bullpen. Guys like Tyler Anderson, Victor Gonzalez, Clevenger, Mitch White, Andre Jackson, Brule, and Phillips. Who of those guys you think are going to emerge or just even make the opening day roster out of that crew?
Well, you know, as you guys know, I think that it's going to be a moving, fluid bullpen and back end of the rotation this season. The rules are emerging that there's going to be a 28-man roster to start the season, and that the 5 option rule will not begin until after the first month of the season. And I think, you know, I fully expect, I would bet on the Dodgers to take a lot of advantage of that early on in the season. And so I would say more than anything that all those guys you mentioned, you know, the vast majority of them will play a role. I think Tyler Anderson, I would expect more to start than to relieve, I would guess. But I think the way the Dodgers have built their pitching staff, you know, and the option rule will hamper them a little bit. But I think that my expectation is always for them to interchange players as much as possible. And, you know, I will note that the option rule does not cover injured list stints, right? You can still create an injury for a pitcher, or, you know, or acknowledge a minor injury and treat it as an injured list stint. So they'll, you know, there's nothing stopping them from continuing to deploy all those guys. I've heard Caleb Ferguson looks really good from his, you know, in his return from his second Tommy John surgery. I would expect him to impact the club. I'm sure you guys remember how good he looked in August and September of 2020. Were those the right months? I forget now. Yeah, until he got hurt.
July and August.
Yeah.
You deemed him the best reliever in the book.
At that time, I think he was. I mean, I think they were. And this was before Kenley Jansen's reemergence, right? This was. I mean, you remember the first couple of games of the 2020 postseason when the Dodgers did not want to use Jansen at all. So it's that was when Ferguson's loss really loomed large, but they were able to convert Urias to the bullpen and sort of get through it that way. But to answer your question, I think all of them. I think Mitch White is going to be the long reliever of choice, or one of them at least, and he fulfilled that pretty well last year without much fanfare. It seemed like to me. Andre Jackson.
I was the fanfare. I was like the captain of the Mitch White bandwagon.
Yeah, I mean, people don't necessarily appreciate like competent pitching, right? Like mostly competent pitching, which is worth a lot of money in Major League Baseball, right? People pay a lot of money to dudes who can guarantee a 4-something ERA in a season. So like I think if you have that and you have that optionable at any time, that's really valuable. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. My next question might be considered a tough one. So who do you think is going to bounce back more, Mookie Betts or Cody Bellinger? And I say Mookie Betts. Yes, I know he had a Fangraphs WAR of like 3.9 last year, but you go back to his pre-COVID seasons, he didn't have one below 5. So I'm going to consider somewhat of a bounce back being over 5 WAR for Mookie Betts, because that's just who he is.
Okay. Well, I mean, so we got to set some parameters here, because if you're talking about like OPS improvement points this year, like I think you have to take Bellinger, right? Like, I mean, what was his OPS last year? I mean, if he's league average, it's going to be a massive improvement, right? Like, I think a jump back to league average for Bellinger would be essentially Betts morphing back into, the best player in the game. So I would guess Bellinger. I would probably expect them both to be better. From talking to people this spring, I don't know anyone. I don't really think that anyone has a great handle on what to expect from Cody Bellinger this year. It's just because, for obvious reasons, right? This is a guy who's been both really good and really bad, and actually in between too. And when he's in between, he's still a greatly valuable player because of his defense, right? And the flexibility he offers. But I don't know. I haven't seen enough of him to really get a grasp of what the swing is going to look like. But that said, like, I'm still taking, if you ask me like over under 700 OPS, like I'm definitely taking the over on that. He's another year removed from the surgery. And so, yeah, I think I feel pretty confident he's going to be at least competent. Where that is in between 700 and 1,000 OPS, I have really no earthly idea, honestly.
Yeah. All right. My final question is pretty vague, but give me one bold prediction about this Dodgers team.
Okay. Let me scan. One bold prediction for this Dodgers team.
Could be a rookie, some impact rookie, surprise performer, anything.
Well, I think they're okay. Who's the expected? Let me put it this way: who's the expected best player on the Dodgers? Like who this season in 2022, most valuable player on the Dodgers? Who would the three of you take?
Trey Turner, Mookie Betts.
Betts, yeah.
Pick one.
I'm going with Betts.
Okay. I'll take Turner.
Trey Turner, yeah.
Okay. I was hoping you'd all take Turner because I think Betts will be that. I don't know if that's qualifies. Let me see. I think okay. How about this? I think that by the end of this year, this is none of my takes are hot enough. I'm not like everything. I'm like, this is only mild. This is like just like 90 degrees.
That's fine. We can take a mild
will
take.
Be, we'll. I mean, having been named the opening day starter, having had a lengthy season where he dialed back a little bit, but was very good nonetheless. I expect him to be sort of a top 3 or 4 starter in the game by the end of the season. I think he's probably like ranked 5th or 6th right now, so that I don't think that's really all that much. I'm trying to think. I mean, maybe Ferg. It would be. That's a good question. Let me.
Well, while you think about that, let me ask you a slightly similar question. Like, what storylines are you most interested in this spring as you're following the Dodgers?
Well, I mean, obviously the Freddie Freeman arrival was interesting. I think it's a funny way to replace a $325 million player to acquire a player who plays a less valuable defensive position, but is as good or better of a hitter and several years older, but making half as much money. It's just like, that's obviously never happened before, right? And it's just a weird thing that the Dodgers can replace, a a player who at his best is like one of the best hitters I've ever seen. You know, granted he hasn't been always at his best, and that'd be one worry if you're signing a 10-year contract with Corey Seager is how many years are you going to get of him near his best? But it's obviously a big loss. But then they replaced him with the guy who's been, you know, even more consistent. And it's a really tantalizing replacement. I think that I would say that I'm following that because it really like. I view it as sort of buttressing the argument I tried to make in the book, which is that one of their significant strengths, maybe the thing they've done the best, is create a roster that's so flexible that they're always able to react even to the unexpected or to the expected that they weren't sure was going to come to fruition. And so, you know, most teams would not be able to do what they did, which is sign a first baseman to replace a shortstop, right? That's the reason it's never happened, is because you could never really do that before. But because they have Trey Turner, who wanted to get back to shortstop, because they have Max Muncy, who's almost as good of a second baseman as he is a first baseman, because they have other options at second base, literally two other quite good options that a lot of other teams would be excited for. They can do this. And I think that's I don't want us to lose sight of how wild that is in the history of baseball, that a team could lose a shortstop and replace him with a first baseman and arguably not get worse defensively as an overall picture, right? Like
they got better defensively.
Yeah, I don't have a great.
I think so.
Yeah, I don't have a great read on what Turner is as a shortstop, but he's not. I don't know him to be significantly worse than Corey Seager, and Freddie Freeman's a great defender at first, and if they have Taylor at second, that's solid. If they have Lux at second, that could be solid, although he's more of an uncertainty. Yeah, I mean, it's not worse, which I think is crazy because they lost the shortstop and replaced him with the first baseman.
That's right. All right, Pedro, I think we have time for one more question. Circling back to the book, How to Beat a Broken Game. You know, I wanted to get your overall takeaway on the 2020 World Series team. And this is kind of two questions in one, but first of all, why did it take a series deficit to the Atlanta Braves to really wake this team up? You go into depth about that night when they're exchanging messages, and then just give us one memorable experience you had covering the team that year.
Let's see. Why did it take them until they were behind 3-1 to play their best? I would guess because of the way, you know, we humans are, is in that like you're not, you know, I say this as a journalist who runs on deadlines, right? And even having gone away from newspapers where deadlines literally run your life, I still find myself most motivated by, you know, the existence of a deadline, whether it be self-imposed, editor-imposed, anything. You simply don't do your best work, I don't think, or most focused, or at least the people I know, and myself included, don't do that without the actual like, what's the word? Without needing to, without absolutely having to. And so that's sort of how they were. Is like the Dodgers for years now have been so talented that they didn't need to maybe be 100% at their best to advance. They certainly didn't in the first round of that postseason, if you remember who they were facing and the lineup they were throwing out. I mean, I think like I'm not sure that the cleanup hitter from the 2020 Brewers is still in the major leagues at this point. And it's not because of age, right? They didn't have to be at their best to advance past the first couple rounds, right? Even the Padres, who had a great year that year, didn't have much pitching by that time. So I would say just because they didn't need to, and so you really only learn what you're capable of once you have to. And your other question was what? Remind me, Ken?
Just like share one memorable experience, whether it's public knowledge or something maybe no one knows that really stood out to you during that 2020 season.
Yeah, well, I mean, personally, what's always going to stand out to me the most is, you know, just covering it from home, a lot of it, you know, and sitting on my couch and like teaching my partner like a lot more about baseball than she ever knew before that, you know, it just because it was on television all the time and it was my job too. And it was, I mean, it's, you know, it'll never stop being strange, that memory, right? So I guess that reigns supreme in my brain. The 2020 spring training was, you know, was always like a big professional memory, just because the first couple of weeks everyone was so fired up about the Astros revelations, and the first week it was like every day another Dodger was popping off about what had happened, and like, you know, Carlos Correa told Cody Bellinger to go fuck himself in the you know, and it was like covering wrestling or something like that, you know, and and then it all shut down. It was just so strange, you know, and like it'll always be such a strange season. And I didn't necessarily want to, you know, spend the entire book on like how, wow, COVID was a strange year for us all in 2020, you know, because that's we all have experienced that in our own ways, right? Everyone here, I'm sure, had their own like things that make them chuckle. That like if you tried to explain to us, it'd be like, okay, sure, yeah, but it's weird. So it's just that I guess that's when I think of the 2020 season, I'm going to think of the fact that it started off so hot and then it cooled down to an absolute no, not even a trickle for 3 months, and then the season started, and the Dodgers were so clearly the class of their, you know, of the league, and had so much talent on that roster, and then they you know, and then they were marooned out there for a month and made it happen. I mean, the other one, I mean, how about that? How about the play in how about the comedy of errors play in the World Series with Chris Taylor? I mean, that's a memory for sure. I mean,
Game 4.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Taylor to Muncy to Smith, and then Jansen not covering. I mean, that's like, whoa. I mean, that was you
know that if the Dodgers had lost the World Series, that clip would have been just on loop everywhere,
forever.
just forever. Oh,
yeah, it's funny to think about that stuff. I'm working on a story right now about Willie Adames, who was the last out, and he took the final 2 strikes looking from Julio Urias, and Willie was in such a bad place. I think he's a really good player. He was in such a bad place at that time that he wasn't even going to swing no matter what happened in the final 2 pitches that I've had. He was trying to sort through stuff in his head during the at-bat and not capable of swinging, and he's always going to regret that. But the thing is he has to see the at-bat all the time. Like the Brewers played at Kingsback Ranch last week, and the clip is playing. He has to see it all the time, almost every day. And it's motivated him to be a whole new player. And he was great last year, MVP candidate. And I just think the concentration of moments in those moments in those in the playoffs, and how they like can guide, like, you know, an entire narrative of a team or players' careers, you know, will never stop being wild. Yeah.
Were you able to come up with a bold prediction? If not, shoot us a message. We'll read it next week.
I think I'm the guy who just doesn't have any bold predictions. So I guess my bold prediction is that there are none. You know, I think I think the Giants are going to be better again than people expect them to be, and I expect that the division race will be closer again than people expect it to be. So maybe that.
That's definitely bold in my book.
Yeah. Speaking of putting things on replay, we'll have that on replay for David if the Giants actually do as well as you say they will, because he doesn't think so.
I've died on the hill for the past year and a half that they just are not good, and I will continue to die on that hill. Well, because it's in my blood.
Well, you were wrong last year, right? You can.
I was.
Because at this point, I mean, I said that, you know, like on April 1st and May 1st and June 1st and July 1st, but I was definitely wrong about it the entire time. And I'm not by no means am I projecting 107 wins for them, not even 97, but I think they're going to be a player. I would guess playoffs versus if you forced me to pick, I would say playoffs. And I just think it's going to be interesting again, which is, you know, probably good for us all in terms of entertainment value. I think the Giants have hit on a lot of what the Dodgers succeeded with, right? This is not groundbreaking stuff to say, but like, you know, given that their lead executive was the Dodgers #2, a lot of what they've managed to do really well, you know, they had better depth than the Dodgers last year in the playoffs. That's why the Dodgers had to go to the methods that they did during the DS. And I think that really undermined the Dodgers' abilities, because in the past they didn't have to do that because they knew that they had the depth and the stars, and they still have the stars on the Giants. The Giants do not have the star power the Dodgers do, but until the Dodgers prove that they're back to, you know, the level of 26 through 40 roster depth that they had, you know, in 18, 19, 20, I think you have to respect what the Giants assembled last year, especially.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Pedro, for joining us today. Once again, I remind you guys, make sure to purchase How to Beat a Broken Game, coming out this Tuesday, March 29th. And I swear to God, you're going to learn so much about the Dodgers and the art, the research and development, the front office, and all the training staff that just went into how this Dodgers team became almost a near dynasty. So, Pedro, I hope you have a great 2022 ahead covering baseball.
Hey, yeah, Kevin, thank you so much, Jake. David, thank you guys too. This is fun. Appreciate it. I'm happy to come on anytime. But thank you for supporting the book, and I hope people read it and like it and let me know about it and email me and or complain about it if they don't like certain parts of it. That's fine too. I'm happy to hear it. Yeah, but thanks for providing me a platform and having us talk about it. It's been fun.
Anytime. All right,
Thank you,
Pedro.
Thank you, Pedro.
We appreciate it.
Thank you. That was a chill time with Pedro. Once again, thank you for joining us. So now the next 20, 30 minutes or so, we got to talk some Dodgers because there's been a lot of transactions, believe it or not, in the last week since we last were on the air. And we'll start off with some of the latest news involving maybe a fan favorite, maybe not, depending on who you are. But Matt Beaty was designated for an assignment. And, to be quite honest, I kind of saw this coming. I thought, it was time when the DH became universal. The Dodgers didn't really need Matt Beaty anymore because he's a great pinch hitter, but he's very limited defensively. He can't hit lefties that well. He's a career WAR of -0.1, 262 batting average, 333 slash line, 425 slugging with 18 home runs over 3 seasons. But for some reason to me, it feels like he's been a Dodger longer than 3 seasons. But wanted to get your guys' perspective because the one positive that I will say about Matt Beaty, because I'm not a total hater, dude was just clutch in the regular season, 359 career average with runners in scoring position.
Yeah, I always appreciated Matt Beaty for who he was, what he was capable of doing. I never really expected him to do much more than he did. And quite honestly, there were a lot of times where he came through that I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, he had some pretty great moments as a Dodger, most notably, last season with the that huge game he had in Milwaukee, where he, just absolutely went off.
And then got benched the next day.
Which still can't get over myself.
2 games.
That never made sense to me. And then the other moment where he had the back-to-back home runs in 2019 with I think it was Will Smith and Alex Verdugo was the other two guys.
I was at the Beaty one.
Yeah. So the 3 consecutive walk-offs. So there were some great Dodger moments for him, but I think the writing was on the wall, when they signed Hanser Alberto, obviously, because when they officially did, they DFA'd Matt Beaty. But like the news of Hanser Alberto coming on, Friedman wanting to not have that situation happen again in the postseason where he had a very limited bench and they couldn't really come through when the Dodgers needed them to. But yeah, the one thing I am interested to know is kind of like, what the hell went on between Matt Beaty and the Dodgers organization? I mean, I feel like there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been released yet. I don't know what it is, but maybe now that he's not a Dodger anymore, we'll hear some of the drama that went on, but that's really the only thing I can say. You're
obviously alluding to when he inserted himself into the game as a
I'm going to get to that. That's my cue. That is my lasting memory of Matt Beaty. He pinch hit himself into the game, allegedly, when Julio Urias had 82 pitches and was cruising. The Dodgers bullpen was already tired and beat up. And then he got on and tried to steal a base. And Matt Beaty is not a speedster, and it did not work out well. So, Matt Beaty, thank you for several years of service. On this podcast, I said the implementation of the DH in the National League was going to create jobs. Well, it actually took one in the process because once the NL instituted the DH, Matt Beaty's worth to the Dodgers decreased dramatically.
Yep.
There is going to be way less pinch hitting in the National League this year.
That was always my point of why anti-DH, but sorry, I'll let you go. Continue.
Yeah, and that sealed Matt Beaty's fate as a Dodger. Compare that with signing Freddie Freeman. They just didn't need another left-handed bat on the bench who can only pretty much play first base. Yeah, he can play left field, but it's not pretty. He's not fast. And he's mostly a pinch hitter. So that pretty much sealed his fate with the Dodgers. He is going to get at least one more chance in the major leagues, no doubt. I mean, he is a professional hitter. He'll sign somewhere. But
I think he'll get traded, to be honest, to a bad team.
I think they tried. I feel like they absolutely have tried to trade him in the past 5 to 7 days and just couldn't find a taker. I think he's just going to end up clearing waivers or something.
Also, I think it's very encouraging how Edwin Rios has looked so far this spring. It looks like his shoulder's not really bothering him anymore. He's already 5 for 8 this spring. He had a home run today on Thursday. He has 4 RBIs so far this spring. So it's really encouraging to see him performing well, because that is just, that makes the loss of Beaty not as impactful as it could have been.
And if you're a conspiracy theorist, remember Matt Beaty got sent down last year. I believe
about a month.
Yeah, I believe he finished 1 game shy of reaching a full service time. So I'm sure, the Jessica Beaty conspiracy theorists will have a field day with that one.
Yep, you guys hit the other points I wanted to talk about with Beaty, and it always felt like it was going to come down to Edwin Rios and Beaty. And Jake just mentioned how Rios is having a resurgence in spring. We could talk more about him in a little bit, because I had some thoughts on him as well. But yeah, I just, you look at what Beaty did in 2020 when the universal DH was at that point, the first time in the NL, hit 220, and then the AAA and service time and the inserting himself into the game. So, yep. Thank you, Matt Beaty. You'll probably go to the Oakland A's now, where they need a first baseman, and I'll root for you, because you probably have an opportunity to play every day. And I think consistency is something Beaty has actually wanted.
No doubt.
Moving on, Dodgers made a signing in the pitching department. Made a couple, actually, but we'll start with the signing of Tyler Anderson, the 32-year-old left-handed starter. $8 million deal, went 7-11 last season with a 4.53 ERA. Sorry, Anderson, but this is a AM/PM sponsored Dodgers team, so 7-11 ain't gonna fly. But on that note, I have to be honest. I haven't hated an Andrew Friedman signing since the Scott Kazmir one back in 2016. There's been some trades I don't like, but in terms of the actual signings, this is the first one since then, and I'll tell you why. Anderson is not a good road pitcher, believe it or not. For a guy that spent his career at Coors Field for 4 seasons on the road over the entire tenure of his career, he has a 13-19 record, a 5.41 ERA on the road, 291 innings pitched. And I know that he did pitch today on March 24th, had 7 strikeouts, but you know who it was against? It's against the Rockies, so I don't really care. It's going to be a roller coaster of emotions with Anderson, and he probably will be our 5th or 6th starter. But this is the type of guy where he'll go out there, kind of like Chris Capuano back in the day, maybe have a quality start, and then the next outing, he's going to give up 5 or 6 runs. And I'm fully expecting meltdowns on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram with Tyler Anderson.
It's funny you mentioned Chris Capuano, because I was going to make that comparison. Even their motion is a little similar, just kind of a weird lefty hitch motion. I don't really care about this move one way or the other. Like I said from the outset, I think the Dodgers need to get as much pitching as possible. They're just keep signing guys. Doesn't matter. They're going to need the depth at some point, because this starting rotation is very vulnerable, even if they do have Trevor Bauer, and that's still up in the air, as we've all discussed. But yeah, this guy, Tyler Anderson, I felt like last year he had some pretty good stretches, good enough for him to get dealt at the deadline, and I think he got dealt from the Pirates to the Mariners, if I'm correct. And so I feel like there is something within him. And it'll be interesting to see, who performs better, Tyler Anderson or Andrew Heaney. That's kind of like the same kind of, level for me.
I love this signing. I absolutely love this signing. Has he been lights out his entire career? No. Is he a serviceable major league starting pitcher? Absolutely. And that's what we lacked last year. We had to throw
if he can be Randy Wolf
after bullpen game, which are Jake's least favorite thing on this planet. So I'd expect him to love this signing too.
That's what I said.
You get Anderson, you got Heaney, you got Price, you got Gonsolin, you got Jackson, you got Mitch White. If that group can't produce a couple quality starts every turn through the rotation, then what else can you do? Nothing. So Andrew Friedman and Gomes have put this Dodgers roster in a position to succeed. You're going to need Buehler, Arias, Kershaw, and maybe Bauer to carry the load. But that group I mentioned, if they can't be a serviceable 4 and 5 pitcher, then that's on them. This roster has everything it needs to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, jumping for joy at this signing, but I think, yeah, you need someone like this. You need everybody.
I am jumping up and down in my living room.
Yes, we can see that, and we don't know why. Tyler Anderson is if he can be like a Randy Wolf type of guy, then that's great.
Yeah,
he'll be a Tyler Anderson type of guy, which is a 4.60 ERA over the course of his career.
You want to take a bet on his ERA this year? Set a number. Set an over/under number.
450.
I'll take the under.
Okay, I'll go over.
$20. I still owe you 10 for that Kershaw Super Bowl bet too. I haven't forgotten.
Do we have an innings limit? Because if he throws like 3 outings in there,
yeah, obviously, okay, it's got to be over
100 innings.
70 innings.
70. All right, fine.
All right, deal.
With that being said, you guys just mentioned the pitching. Roberts earlier addressed the media saying he expects to use a number of guys in piggyback situations, and you named like all of them, Gonsolin and Mitch White, Jackson, the list goes on. I'm kind of interested to see how stretched out Clayton Kershaw might be, because the season is vastly approaching, and he's only gone, I think, 2 innings max so far, as opposed to Walker Buehler, who went 4 1/3, I believe. And Walker Buehler, of course, was named the opening day starter. Don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. I think it was Walker's time to get the nod. He is, in my opinion, the ace of the staff at this point in his Dodgers career. And I think he just deserved it.
Yeah, my only thought is this. I think with how free agency went for Clayton Kershaw, the Dodgers signed into a 1-year deal. It's kind of, he said he wasn't contemplating retirement at all, but we're getting towards the end of times here for Clayton Kershaw. And I think with the emergence of Buehler as the ace, in every sense of the word, I think it's a great move and a great time to do it, to establish Buehler as the ace of the Dodgers staff moving forward, so that when you get to his eventual free agency, you can say, hey, you are our guy. No matter what, you are going to be our opening day starter every single time out. And here's a fat contract. We want you to stay. I'm not saying if they didn't do that at this time that he wouldn't re-sign with the Dodgers, but I can kind of see the trajectory here. And I agree with Kevin. It was perfect timing for this.
Yeah. Passing of the guard in real time, changing of the guard, passing of the torch.
Just like that scene in Shawshank Redemption when the lead gets out of the prison and he's in the rain and he lifts his hands up in the air. That was my feeling when it was announced out of thin air that Luke Raley had been traded from the Los Angeles Dodgers to the Tampa Bay Rays in exchange for a minor league pitcher, Tanner Dodson. Maybe he'll become a gem. Don't know. Rays pitchers usually end up being pretty good. But my first question is, why on earth would the Rays want Luke Raley? And second of all, thank God that they were able to just find a new home for Raley, because they gave him the lion's share of opportunity last season. And to say he failed was an understatement.
Yeah, I still think he's close. I think the Rays,
close to what? Japan?
To being something in the major leagues. Obviously, he didn't find it last year, and obviously it was a brutal watch at the plate. After he hit that home run in San Diego, he did absolutely nothing. He had no business being on the Dodgers roster this year. I'm rooting for him in Tampa Bay. I do think he could unlock something and become a serviceable player. But to say that I'm sad to see him go would be a lie.
He's got pop. I mean, when he makes contact, he can hit the ball very far. The issue is that he wasn't making contact at all. Yeah. So if he can fix that, then I think that's a recipe for success. And that's all I have to say about Luke Raley. Good luck, pal.
Yep.
He was Mike Trout in AAA. Crazy OPS, lots of home runs. I think he was in the 20s. And then every time he came back up to the Dodgers, he either strike out, make no contact, or weak grounders to first base.
Oh, the weak grounders to first. Yeah.
He can book it down that line.
That's not going to be enough for me.
I'm over watching the ground out to second and him hustle down the line. I'm over it.
The Dodgers also welcomed back Danny Duffy, who made quite the appearance last season, household name because he did a whole lot of nothing for the Dodgers. Didn't appear in a single inning, but they brought him back on a low ball deal. I mean, I'm not against it because when he does come back, which the expectation is hopefully June or July, he'll be a reliever out of the bullpen. And that's just another lefty to stack. And if Ferguson's healthy, Vesia, Victor Gonzalez, and then Duffy, that's a lot of options.
You know, what's crazy is that when they traded for him at the deadline, I felt like all the news was out there they were saying that he was going to be ready at some point during the season. Now he's going to be out till June of the next season.
Well,
what the hell happened?
He went under surgery. But still, yeah, it was deceiving because we expected him to be a Dodger down the stretch last season, and then he just couldn't pitch. So
I'm expecting absolutely nothing. So anything he gives us is going to be a plus. And if he's healthy, we know he's a good pitcher. So that's all you can really say.
He was an all-star.
Yeah.
Yeah, if he pitches for us, great. I'm not going to hold my breath.
Kevin Pillar was signed to a minor league deal, 280 career batting average against left-handed pitching. He's also a tremendous defender in the outfielder. We've seen him with the Giants and the Rockies, and he was on the Blue Jays for a while, and the Mets where he got his face smashed in. I think he has a legitimate opportunity to eventually crack this 40-man roster, kind of like Steven Souza did last season, except the difference is Pillar can actually hit a baseball and he has an arm.
Another signing I loved. This is just proven major league bench talent. I loved what he had to say about it as well. He said he's here to see what kind of player he can become. He's already fully bought into the Dodgers system, the development team. Yes, he's on the older side. That doesn't mean you can't still develop. Phenomenal signing. Excellent.
Yeah. I think that any player that can improve this bench is a godsend. And like what Pedro Moura was discussing when we talked to him, you know, that is what was the 2020 team. It was just depth from top to bottom, and it didn't matter if a guy got injured or whatever. There was always a guy that could replace that. And so last year, there just wasn't that. Everybody they brought up from AAA was a disaster. And so like you mentioned, David, proven major league talent off the bench, guys that not only have been proven major leaguers, but proven guys that can come off the bench, because that's a huge difference, right? Is like, you know, necessarily if you take a guy that used to be an everyday player and stick him on the bench, it's a crapshoot whether he'll be good or not. He may be good, he may not be good, but guys like Pillar, Hanser Alberto, maybe even Jake Lamb, who knows? Those guys know how to come off the bench, and that's a talent in of itself.
All right. Speaking of some of those guys you just named, moving over to spring training now because we have about a week into the books. Want to get your thoughts on a player or two that have really stood out to you, and if that's the guy you're gonna keep your eye out on the rest of spring training, and if you have any bold predictions, feel free to share it.
Go ahead, David.
Please, I insist.
Okay, so some players that I'm keeping an eye on. Obviously Freddie Freeman, but, you know, just so that we can update everybody, he's, you know, 2 for 5. He had an RBI on Thursday. So he's looking good going the other way. But an interesting guy that's been kind of hot this spring training has been Eddie Alvarez, the Olympian. Who knows if he'll factor in at some point. Maybe he'll agree to some sort of minor league deal and, you know, end up in the minors, and so the Dodgers can bring him up at some point during the season. But this guy is hitting .417 so far this spring. He's 5 for 12, 2 home runs, another one today, 2 RBIs. Really liked what we've been seeing from him. I talked about Edwin Rios already. And then Tony Gonsolin, his spring debut on Thursday, 3 perfect innings, no runs, no hits, no errors, no walks, 4 strikeouts. I'm really, really encouraged to see that because I think if healthy, if given a consistent rotation spot, he is going to be a factor this season.
I like everything you said. I'm keeping an eye on some of these pitchers, specifically the left-handed relievers. Victor Gonzalez looks physically great.
Yep.
I mean, he is slimmed down. He looks good. Garrett Clevenger has pitched very well in a small sample size. And then I'm also keeping an eye on Justin Bruhl and Caleb Ferguson, who's back from his second Tommy John surgery. So I'm interested to see how those 4 lefties factor into the, I guess, overall big picture. Obviously, they've all contributed. Obviously, Gonzalez and Ferguson the most. But I think they all might have a role, especially with the 28-man rosters, the no penalizing options for the first month of the year. I think it's going to be kind of a carousel and basically a tryout to see who's going to join Vesia in the bullpen in terms of left-handers.
I also wrote down those lefties, so I'm glad you mentioned them. Edwin Rios, this guy is just looking like the guy that we all kind of expected him to become. He's so locked in the plate right now. He looks healthy. He kind of has an Adrian Gonzalez swing to his approach, in my opinion. Blasted that home run on Thursday, like you mentioned. And then another pitcher who I hope we get to see a little more out of. David mentioned him a week ago, but Carson Fulmer threw 2 scoreless innings. He looked really sharp. And right now I'm kind of almost circling him into a spot on the opening day bullpen, kind of like Jimmy Nelson walked on last season. Evan Phillips, I know that a lot of people like him. He's kind of a hit or miss type of player. I think Carson Fulmer, the ceiling is higher with him. Not to mention he was a teammate of Walker Buehler, top 10 draft pick. If he can become this elite reliever out of the bullpen, I think he could be essentially a replacement for Kenley Jansen, but we should talk about Jansen in a second because I forgot about that. So yeah, those are the guys I'm looking to keep my eye out on. So I'm really excited about this Dodgers bullpen. So on that note, Kenley Jansen did find a new team. He's signing with the Atlanta Braves on a 1-year, $16 million contract. They're promising him the closer role. I kind of felt Jansen was going to be a goner heading into the offseason. I don't affect the Dodgers too much. I think our bullpen is just extremely deep, but it did come out in the LA Times, I believe, that Kenley Jansen did want to come back to the Dodgers, but the Dodgers offered him a 2-year contract, but they are so high in payroll, $275 million, I want to say, that they told him that they're going to have to clear some salary first in order to re-sign him. And so Jansen just decided to take what was on the table already from the Atlanta Braves. And he grew up a Braves fan, actually, so I'm sure it's an easy adjustment for him. But, thank you to Kenley, arguably the greatest Dodgers closer in the history of the franchise. How many seasons? 12 seasons with the Dodgers? I wish I knew the number off the top of my head.
The organization, 12 or 13.
Yeah, just an absolute warrior. Dude was willing to die on the field back in 2018 when he was having some heart issues, and he said he was willing to go out there and Coors, even though the doctors advised him not to. Thankfully, Kenley didn't end up having to do that, but it was such a crazy year that in 2018, I'm sure Jansen would have done it if he needed to. So, yeah, what a beast.
He is a beast. And, for a closer, the mentality is so much different than any other player on the team. Any other role on the team, it is a different beast entirely. Some could consider it maybe even the toughest position on the team in terms of the pressure that is applied to you each time out. And so for Kenley to have that short memory, to be able to come back from some disastrous outings and some disastrous stretches overall was, like Kevin mentioned, he was the best closer the Dodgers have ever had. And, this guy was not only praised, but he was booed. I mean, you think about all the times that Kershaw blew it in the postseason. Not once did Kershaw ever get booed for anything. And it sort of begs the question as to why you would boo Kenley Jansen, but that just speaks to the closer role. I mean, it is an unbelievable type of role to have where, the game is in your hands every time you go out there. And if you mess up, you could lose the game for your team. I mean, think about that. So just an incredible competitor, an incredible Dodger. What a story. We've talked about it millions of times, from a minor league catcher to the greatest closer the Dodgers have ever had. Gonna miss Kenley Jansen. I think the Dodgers looked at this and said, you know what, there are too many younger, maybe even more important free agents that we need to keep. And they looked at the financials and said, I think we can handle the bullpen without Kenley Jansen this year.
Yeah, we all knew this was going to happen. It felt like only a matter of time. I can't say anything but good things about Kenley Jansen. Yes, it's only a 1-year deal in Atlanta, so we don't truly know if his time as the Dodgers is fully complete. He could always come back, but I'm happy for him. Dodgers just had too many other guys to pay and too many other issues to address. We said it all off season. The bullpen is the strongest part of this team. pre-Freddie Freeman acquisition. So like you guys said, I mean, he just wasn't, at least in the offseason, he wasn't a necessary piece of this team. As crazy as that sounds, as good as he was last year, there was bigger holes to fill.
Cool. I have an idiot tweet of the week. If
I like it.
I want
Let's
to lead
hear it.
this. All right. So this is in response to our friend Blake Harris, who announced the Kevin Pillar minor league signing. Comes from @Valdez310. A
Hope
trade.
he's not a listener. The awkward.
Well, maybe he'll be honored. A trade must be in the works because unless Pilar's body can't handle it anymore, he's a better player than CT3. Shrug emoji.
Oh, it's this idiot.
#Dodgers. I doubt Pilar is physically able to play in the majors. Good pickup, though, if he is, though. So, first of all, what kind of drugs do you have to be on to think that Kevin Pillar, no offense to him because he is a fine player, though, but to think he's better than Chris Taylor? First of all, in 2021, Kevin Pillar slashed to 231, 277 on base, 425 slugging versus Chris Taylor, who was an all-star, ended up hitting 254, 344, 438 slugging. But in the first half, Chris Taylor, before the injury, because that did come out as well, bone chips in his elbow, I believe, he had like a 380 on base in the first half. And then was a complete animal, our best hitter in the postseason.
But I don't even know what the tweet means, because what do you mean there's a trade in the works? Like they're going to trade Chris Taylor? Is that what he's implying?
I think so.
You got to lay the background here. This guy has had a long history of hating Chris Taylor for absolutely no reason. You can search his shit, and it is nonsensical, his hatred for Chris Taylor. First of all, how does anyone hate Chris Taylor? He is the most uncontroversial, boring human being in the history of the world. Second of all, he's done nothing but produce for this Dodgers team his entire Dodgers career. Third of all, this guy needs to just shut up. I don't know what Chris Taylor did to this specific individual, but this has gone on long enough. He needs to either get rid of this resentment or start shutting the hell up.
I don't know where you guys would rank that. I know it's not number one. I think Ben Verlander still takes the cake, but that might be like 2 or 3.
It's not even an idiot tweet. It's just a nonsensical, irrational hatred of a harmless baseball player. I don't know why that guy hates him, but he hates him. He legitimately has hate for Chris Taylor.
Sounds like the definition of idiot to me.
Yeah, it's fair. But I mean, he's not touching the Ben Verlander one.
No, I don't think anybody will.
No, it's a long season, Jake.
Okay.
What if Ben Verlander will top it?
Well, I think he may be the only one.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
This could be an unbreakable record like Joe DiMaggio's 56 game hitting streak.
Hey, that was almost broken.
I know.
Luis Castillo got close there for a minute.
Kevin, I don't know where you want to go next, but can I bring up something real quick?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. And I don't know why this riled me up as much as it did, but here we go. So
I like it already.
Dave Roberts said on the Dan Patrick Show that he's guaranteeing the Dodgers will win the World Series in 2022. And while that's all good and fine, obviously Dave thinks very highly of this team, and the Dodgers have World Series aspirations every single season, being the class of the National League and kind of being the Yankees of the West, so to speak. So the target's already on the Dodgers' back. But the reason this riled me up is why do you got to say that? Obviously they're gonna try to win the World Series, and it's going to be a baller quote if the Dodgers do end up winning the World Series in 2022. But if they don't, then he's going to look like the biggest idiot ever, because why would you guarantee that? Did
he specifically say, I guarantee?
He said guarantee. He said it, the word guarantee.
Okay. All right.
He said the Dodgers are going to win the World Series in 2022. That's what he said. I
guarantee it. He said, I guarantee it?
Yes, Men's Warehouse. He guarantees it.
Okay. All right. I particularly don't hate this. I mean, what do you want him to say? Do you want him to be like, yeah, we're going to compete? That's boring. That's boring. I don't think he's putting any pressure on anybody. I don't think the Dodgers players are going to be like, oh, Dave Roberts, our manager said we're going to guarantee you. Now we have a lot of pressure. No, they already got pressure. Everyone's always gunning for the Dodgers. The only thing that this is going to do is when the Padres are eliminated from the playoffs, when they didn't even make the playoffs, these Padres fans are going to go back to that tweet. They're going to go back to this clip if the Dodgers don't win the World Series and act like it's the biggest dunk of all time and try to troll everybody. That's all it is.
Well, yeah, in my opinion, I'm not worried about the Dodgers competing for the World Series. The only thing that's going to hold them back and prevent them from winning is Dave Roberts, just like in 2019. You could argue in 2018, maybe 2021 to an extent. So Dave Roberts better put his money where his mouth is because he has all the talent in the world. This might be the best roster they've ever given to him. So
I don't know. It sounds a little bit like that Sports Illustrated cover of Steve Nash and Dwight Howard. This is going to be fun. Like, I don't know. That's why I had a huge eye roll with it. I'm just like,
the Eagles had the dream team. Maybe now it was a decade ago. And Vince Young was on record saying, guaranteeing they win the Super Bowl. And then they went 4-12 or something.
Yeah. The Dodgers are going to be good no matter what. But I mean, predicting they're going to win the World Series, I get it. Some fans like David, for instance, would appreciate the confidence in Dave Roberts, but I just look at it like, why you got to say that?
Yeah. I mean, he could have just not said it, but
you got to say it after an emotional win, like after the NLCS when he was like, this is our year. This is our year.
I'm fine with that.
No, I hated that. Absolutely fucking hated that.
Well, why? Okay, hold on. Wait. Why did you hate that and not hate this?
Because this is preseason. This is like no pressure. We're in spring training. We're just talking. We're going on radio shows. The other one, when we had just won the NLCS after coming back from 3-1, and we only have 4 games to go. Given we've lost 2 prior World Series in the last 3 years, that is when you shut up, Dave. I mean, it worked out, and now it looks like he's got balls of steel when he said it, but that is when you're 4 games away from a world championship, your first world championship since 1988, you shut up.
I thought the Dodgers are riding look, they came down from 3-1. I think Dave looked at this and said, all right, that was the toughest thing we're going to have to do in this postseason. And we've got this.
I completely agree with your assessment, but that doesn't mean you should say that.
Yeah.
4 games, you need 4 more wins. That's when you keep your mouth shut.
Yeah. Well, it was the Rays. Let's be honest. We gave them a game. It should have been a 5-game series. If Pedro Baez didn't shake off Will Smith and throw a hanging cutter to Brandon Lau, would have crushed them.
Pedro Baez shouldn't have even been in that situation.
That was in the book too, where Dave Roberts told Pedro, you can relax, and then Jock put us back ahead, and then Dave flips it and says, Pedro, you're going back in.
God.
There was no need to bring him back out there.
And then Roberts later admits, I don't think it was to the reporters, but he admits that he regretted that move big time.
Yeah, we all did.
Yeah, I bet he did.
So running out of time here.
He called it in real time, I remember. We were like, what is he doing? Why is he sending him back out there?
Yes, because when Dave Roberts makes a pitching mistake before it happens, it is always the most obvious, what the hell is he doing move.
Right.
All right. Got a few minutes left. So with that being said, did you guys want to make any quick bold predictions or quick final thoughts?
I'm going to save my bold predictions for probably next week or the week after, whichever is closest to the season.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have too many final thoughts. I just hope, spring training, everybody gets out of there healthy. Obviously, we're not going to get any news on this Bauer situation, but that's still looming over this team, and there's still plenty of question marks in the pitching rotation because of it. So I'm just hoping that everybody's healthy out of spring training. We get to start in Colorado, I believe. So we should be able to get the season started on our right foot.
I know that Mookie Betts is dealing with some illness,
what the hell is that?
I don't know, but that's the one thing that I'm looking forward to seeing is how he looks, to see if he has kind of recovered from some of the lingering injuries that were hampering him the last few seasons. God, I would love to see Mookie Betts just, have a re-breakout season where he just absolutely tears up the league.
This could be the one. I have a good feeling about Mookie Betts, but yeah, I'll save the Dodgers predictions for maybe next week. I will say my MVP of the National League, giving you guys a teaser. I'm picking Juan Soto. Probably not very bold, but I think
it's the least bold take of all time.
Yeah, it's like my White Sox take.
I think he's hitting 45 home runs and having an on base of over 400. So there you go. I don't think Ohtani's winning MVP again.
I agree. I don't think he is either.
I think if he's healthy, he could.
I don't know.
I think it's going to depend on his health.
Guess we'll find out. His health for sure.
And Gonzaga just got eliminated.
Yeah, my Wolverines are next, but that's okay. We had a good season.
Had a good run.
Thank you guys so much for listening to the Incline Dodgers podcast today. Thank you again to Pedro Moura for joining us. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating. Subscribe to the Incline Dodgers wherever you get your podcasts, and you can follow us on Twitter at the Incline Pod or our individual handles, which is in the description below. And we're on YouTube too. So yeah, this is a quick spring training, no doubt about it. And the season is almost here, but it's going to be a good one. And we got some hot takes and all that lined up next week, I'm sure. So you're going to want to hear those because we might yell at each other. And on that note, go Dodgers and have a great rest of your week and weekend, guys.